Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look at some productivity resources, and it looks like you've been doing some serious research on this topic.
Yeah, it looks like we've got videos from Dan Martell and Justin Sung, and even an episode from the Andrew Huberman podcast with Cal Newport.
I love that podcast.
Me too. Huberman's great.
And Cal Newport, well, he basically wrote the book on deep work.
Literally, yeah.
So, yeah.
So, looks like you're really trying to get a handle on this whole productivity thing. Not just quick tips, but the deeper stuff, right?
Totally. I'm ready to upgrade my whole approach, and I think these sources are going to be awesome for that.
I agree. They're all fantastic resources. Okay, so where should we start?
Let's jump in with Dan Martell. I'm really intrigued by his 90-10 principle.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. It's about focusing on what not to do, right?
Exactly. I love how he uses that analogy of driving a McLaren. It's like, you got to focus on the road ahead, not the distractions on the side.
He's all about eliminating those low-yield tasks, isn't he? Not just working harder, but working smarter. So true. And when you think about it, that's pretty much the essence of Pareto's principle, or the 80-20 rule. Identifying the 20% that really drives the results.
Exactly. So if we apply that to our lives, we need to figure out what our personal McLarens are, right? Those high-value activities that we should be prioritizing.
Absolutely. That's a great way to think about it. All right, so we've got this idea of focusing on the high-yield tasks. Now, let's shift gears a bit to Justin Sung. I found his story about Hannah, the burnt-out med student, incredibly relatable. It shows that willpower and to-do lists aren't always enough.
Sung's all about understanding how our brains work, right?
Yeah.
He says we're wired to conserve energy, to seek shortcuts.
So instead of fighting against our brains, we should work with them.
Precisely. Design systems that support our brain's natural tendencies, not try to force it to do something it doesn't want to do.
That makes sense. It's like we're setting ourselves up for success by acknowledging our limitations. Okay, so now we've got Martell's focus on high-impact tasks and Sung's emphasis on working with our brains, not against them. And this kind of leads us to Cal Newport's concept of deep work, right?
Yeah, that ties in beautifully. Remember that imagery he uses in the Huberman podcast?
Yeah.
The fireplace in the library.
Oh, yeah. It really paints a picture of intense concentration, like a sanctuary for your most important work.
Exactly. Deep work is about minimizing distractions and achieving a state of flow where you're totally immersed in what you're doing.
Okay, this is all great in theory, but how do we actually put these ideas into practice? What are some specific strategies that we can pull from these experts?
Martell's a big fan of creating urgency, setting early deadlines, using timers, that kind of thing.
I can see how that would light a fire under you to get things done. He also talks about committing to others for accountability.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. And then Sung's a big proponent of structure, using time blocking and time boxing to map out your day.
So we're intentionally designing our days for maximum focus instead of just reacting to whatever comes up. Love it. And then there's that classic advice from Martell to eat the frog. Tackle your most challenging task first thing in the morning.
It's all about getting it out of the way and setting a positive tone for the rest of the day.
Totally. Then there's the idea of aligning your tasks with your energy levels. Martell talks about matching your work to your peak performance times.
Yeah, if you're a morning person, schedule your most demanding work then. If you're more of a night owl, lean into that.
Makes sense. I've also been trying to be more aware of my energy dips throughout the day. And Sung has a fantastic distraction cheat sheet for managing interruptions.
It's all about identifying your biggest distractions and proactively creating strategies to deal with them.
I like that, being proactive instead of reactive. And I think that ties into Martell's emphasis on honoring your schedule. Minimize context switching, stick to the plan.
Right. And he even draws a correlation between someone's net worth and how effectively they manage their calendar. He says, show me your calendar, and I'll show you your bank account.
Interesting. So it's about being disciplined with our time and our attention.
And this leads us to another key theme that Martell brings up, the importance of rest and recharge. It sounds counterintuitive, but he argues that rest is essential for productivity.
He even talks about his own experience with burnout and how he had to learn to prioritize rest. I think that's something a lot of us struggle with.
It's hard to give ourselves permission to rest when we feel like we should be constantly pushing and striving.
So true. So it sounds like we've covered quite a bit in this first part. We've touched on focusing on high-yield tasks, working with our brains instead of against them, and even scheduling time for rest and recharge.
And we've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore in these resources.
I'm excited to keep digging in.
So we've got a lot of great ideas about how to work smarter, not just harder.
And a big part of that is making sure we're focusing on the right things, not just filling our days with busy work.
Right, getting the right things done. And it reminds me of something Justin Sung said. He talked about not trusting our brains to make the best decisions when it comes to productivity.
Yeah, I remember that. We have to create systems that support our brains, not just rely on willpower.
Exactly. And he even says that we shouldn't try to change everything all at once, like a huge overhaul.
Oh, right. He called it going nuclear small, fixing one small thing you're sure about before moving on to the next.
Yeah, like building that momentum one step at a time. Kind of reminds me of Cal Newport's approach, actually.
Oh, how so?
Well, he's so deliberate about eliminating distractions. Like, he doesn't even use social media.
Really? Wow. Okay, that's pretty extreme. Do you think most people need to go that far to be productive?
Probably not, no.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main point is just to be aware of how distractions are affecting your focus. And then, take steps to minimize them.
So it might mean turning off notifications, setting boundaries, or even creating a dedicated workspace.
Right. Whatever works for you. So let's say you've got your high-value tasks figured out. You've blocked out time in your calendar. You're ready to focus. But then procrastination hits.
I know that feeling all too well.
We've all been there. And that's where Sung's distraction cheat sheet can be a lifesaver. It's about planning for those weak moments, having a strategy in place.
He even suggests having a list of easy tasks you can do when your brain is fried, or using a website blocker to stay off social media.
Exactly. Proactive, not reactive. And don't forget about your environment. If your workspace is cluttered and chaotic, it's going to be way harder to focus.
Oh, for sure. It's like our environment can either help or hurt our productivity. I was just thinking about what Sung said about using visual cues to signal your brain that it's work time.
Oh, right. Like having a dedicated desk set up for work or lighting a candle to signal the start of a focus session.
Yeah. It's
Good.
like creating a ritual. Okay, and speaking of rituals, Dan Martell's really into managing your energy.
Oh, yeah. He talks about matching tasks to your energy levels throughout the day, like doing creative work in the morning when he's feeling fresh.
Right, because that's when he has the most energy for that kind of work, and then saving meetings for the afternoon when he's more in the mood for social interaction.
Exactly. It's all about working with your natural rhythms, which ties back to Justin Sung's advice about finding flow times in your day, those periods when you're naturally more focused and productive.
It's like we're all little detectives trying to figure out the clues to our own peak performance.
Right. And Sung stresses the importance of respecting those rhythms. Don't try to force yourself into a mold that doesn't fit.
It's like self-awareness is key to finding a sustainable way to be productive.
Absolutely. And it makes me think of what Cal Newport calls the fixed schedule productivity approach. He's very strict about setting boundaries around his work hours and stopping at a set time each day.
But he's not doing it because he's lazy or lacks ambition.
Right. Not at all. He understands that protecting his time and energy is actually essential for being productive in the long run. It's about sustainability.
So it's not about chasing this impossible ideal of perfect productivity, but about finding a rhythm that actually works for you in the long term. One that lets you do your best work without burning out.
I think that's a really important point. And this leads us back to Sung's concept of going for the money.
Right. Identifying those high-impact activities that are truly aligned with your most important goals.
And that can be tricky. How do you know which tasks are actually the ones that are going to move the needle?
That's a good question. Is like, how do we actually figure out what our money activities are?
Well, it all starts with getting clear on what your goals are. What are you ultimately trying to achieve? And then you can start looking at your current activities and ask yourself which of these are directly contributing to those goals.
It's like doing an inventory of your time and energy, seeing where it's all going and making sure it's being invested wisely.
Exactly. And it's not a one-time thing either. Your money activities might change as your goals and priorities evolve.
So it's about staying flexible and adaptable. I like that. You know, we've talked a lot about systems and strategies and hacks for productivity, but I feel like there's another piece we haven't really discussed yet.
What's that?
The mindset, the mental and emotional side of it all.
That's a great point. We can have the best productivity systems in the world, but if our mindset isn't in the right place, it's still going to be a struggle.
Exactly. So how do we cultivate a more productive mindset?
Well, I think that's a conversation for our next segment. We've got a lot to unpack there.
So we've talked about all these strategies and systems, but what about the mindset? Like, how do we actually feel about our work?
Yeah, the mental and emotional side of productivity is huge. I mean, you can have all the best tools and techniques, but if you're approaching your work with dread, you're not going to get very far.
It's so true. So where do we even begin to cultivate a more, productive mindset?
Well, I think Cal Newport's idea of intentionality is a good place to start, being really deliberate about how you're spending your time and energy.
He's all about having a clear purpose, right? Connecting with the why behind what you're doing.
Exactly. When you feel a sense of purpose, it's a lot easier to stay motivated, especially when things get tough.
That makes a lot of sense. And actually, this reminds me of something Dan Martell talks about. He's all about designing a life you don't need to escape from.
I love that, because so many people are chasing success, but they're also setting themselves up for burnout along the way.
And he actually says that hustle culture is a trap.
Oh yeah, he's not afraid to say it like it is.
It's like he's saying that true productivity isn't about working yourself to the bone. It's about creating a life that actually feels good.
Right, a life that's aligned with your values and priorities. And that's where I think Justin Sung's idea of self-compassion comes in.
Being kind to yourself, especially when you mess up. Not beating yourself up over every little mistake.
Exactly. We're all human. We all have limitations. It's okay to make mistakes.
Yeah, I need to hear that more often. So it's about shifting from a mindset of like, I should be doing more, I should be better, to I'm doing my best and that's enough.
Yeah, and that you're learning and growing along the way. It's all part of the process.
Love that. And you know, this reminds me of something else Dan Martell talks about. Designing your ideal day.
Oh, right. He talks about using his morning routine to connect with his creator.
I think the point is to find rituals that help you start the day with intention, whether it's meditation, journaling, or just taking a few minutes to reflect.
Yeah, setting that tone for the day.
I've actually been playing around with my own morning routine lately, and it's crazy how much of a difference even small changes can make.
It really can. Those little shifts in mindset have such a ripple effect throughout the day. Reminds me of something Ali Abdaal says in one of his videos. What's today's adventure going to be?
That's such a cool way to think about it. It's about finding the joy in the process, not just focusing on the end goal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It ties back to Sung's idea of feel-good productivity, right? Like when you enjoy your work, you're naturally more productive.
So it's about creating an environment that feels inspiring, listening to music you love, celebrating those little wins along the way.
Making work feel more like, well, less like work.
Yeah.
And all of this ties back to self-care, which Dan Martell is so passionate about.
He's all about getting enough sleep, taking breaks, making time for things that bring you joy.
He even schedules rest and recharge time in his calendar, like it's a meeting or an appointment.
That's a good idea. It's like self-care isn't a luxury. It's essential for being productive and just feeling good.
Right. So often we feel like we need to be on all the time, pushing ourselves to the limit. But I think what these experts are saying is that true productivity is about finding a sustainable rhythm, taking care of ourselves along the way.
Yeah, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And, you know, thinking about all this, it makes me wonder if there's a bigger picture here. It's not just about individual achievement, but maybe about creating a more humane way of working.
I like that. Like, what if rethinking productivity could actually help create a world where people are less stressed, less burnt out, more fulfilled?
Maybe it's time to question those systems and structures that are driving us to exhaustion in the first place. You know, and design a future of work that actually puts well-being first.
That's a powerful idea.
Yeah.
Maybe true productivity isn't about doing more, but about doing better for ourselves, for our communities, for the planet.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Food for thought for all of us as we continue on our own productivity journeys.
It's an ongoing exploration. We're all learning as we go.
Well, I feel so inspired after this deep dive, ready to put some of these ideas into practice and see what happens.
Me too. Remember, the key is to experiment and find what works for you. Keep learning, keep growing.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.